In an empty television studio, a teleprompter still glows under a single work light. The last words scrolling across it were not written by the man who read them. Who writes those words? And what happens on the day there is no one left to write them? Before 2015, his best-known role was a schoolteacher who stumbles into the presidency by accident. A comedy. 3 seasons of a joke about honesty in a system that had none. Then, the joke walked off the screen. He ran under a party registered months before the campaign and named after the show. A script became a platform. The fictional president won the real office in a runoff, beating a sitting head of state by better than 3 votes to 1. That is the part most retellings flatten into a punchline. It was not an accident. It was a sequence of decisions, each small enough to look harmless, that turned a scripted role into a wartime presidency. Welcome to the Tactical Historian, where paths are read like blueprints. To understand it, go back to the studio when it was full. Notice, first, that the man out front was never working alone. Before the presidency, before the party, there was a production company he helped build, Kvartal 95, named for the Kiev district where its founders grew up. A troupe first, and a business second. Writers, performers, and producers who had worked together since the late 90s. Most retellings skip straight past this room to the punchline. He was not only the face on the screen, he owned the sketch show, the sitcom, and the machinery behind both. The writer's room was his first co-author, and for close to 2 decades he learned to run it. The New Year's specials, the touring live shows, knowing the moment a joke landed. And here, the show stopped being only a show. He registered the party months before the campaign, named it after the hit sitcom, and it carried him to the presidency. The pivot did not require a new machine. It required pointing the machine they already had at a different target. The machine had a target now. What it needed next was a text to run on, and the text was 3 words. The slogan was almost nothing. No program, no promises, no ideology a rival could attack. It offered the country a blank space shaped like a question and asked the voter to write the answer. So how does a man with no platform beat a president who has run the state for years? He mostly declined to argue at all. The one debate was staged in a stadium, not a studio, Kyiv's Olimpiyskiy that April, and theater was the home field. When the runoff was counted, he held close to 3/4 of the vote against a sitting president, a landslide built out of a slogan and a role. And here the paradox has no comfort in it. The sitting president left with approval in the single digits, and still the country skipped the whole class of professionals. Was any of it governance, or only the best performance of governance the country had ever seen? A system out of trust reached for an amateur, and he won because he was not one of them. It left the country a man trained to read a crowd, not to run a state, chosen precisely because he had never learned the second. So the win came off a slogan and a role. What arrived with the office was neither. He was sworn in during the spring of 2019, and the country he inherited was already fighting a low-intensity war in its eastern regions. One that had run for years before his name was ever on a ballot. By United Nations counts, that war had already driven well over 1 million people from their homes before he took office, a number counted and recounted, one no slogan could lift. And here is the turn the inauguration could not soften. The first official text of his presidency was an address, read aloud from a written page, the same act his whole career had been built on. The words now carried a state, a border, and a line of fire, none of it his to have written. The teleprompter had followed him from the studio to the government. Only now the crowd it faced was a country at war, and the text would be judged not on the night, but for years after, by a war that did not care how it read. On the 24th of February 2022, a full-scale invasion opened along a front that would eventually run roughly 600 miles. Evacuation was reportedly on the table. Why not leave? Because this is the moment his whole method broke. Every performance ran on one machine. Words drafted first, judged by a room he could read. Now the draft did not exist, and the room was a country under attack. To leave was to survive and lose what made survival mean anything. To stay was to keep the one indispensable speaker inside the one building most worth hitting. No clean answer, only two prices in different currencies. He stayed. The United States, by widely reported accounts, offered to fly him out that first night, and he refused. The system, out of trust, had reached for the outsider, chosen because he had only ever run the machine that reads a crowd, never the one that runs a state. So when the scripted word ran out, all that was left was the man and the crowd, unmediated, the exact pairing it had chosen him for. From that week, he recorded a nightly address, thousands of broadcasts across the years, not a break from the path arriving at the one night it had been built for. And yet the nightly address had a ceiling. A message for a country under attack reaches that country first. The method that survived the broken script now had to carry across a border, into rooms that owed it nothing. By the end of that first year, he addressed the United States Congress in person, a sitting wartime president speaking on American soil while his own country still burned. The readable crowd was gone. This chamber would not laugh, would not swing, and gave back no live tally at all. On that rostrum, the gap between the written and the spoken widened past anything the studio had known. The words had to cross a language and a continent before they meant anything. Then the recognition. Then Time named him Person of the Year for 2022, citing what the magazine called the spirit of Ukraine. The reader of a page, weighed at last for the one craft he had trained his whole life. But it had a price it did not print. By various United Nations estimates, more than 6 million crossed the border as refugees that first year, with millions more displaced inside the country. The same year that put him on that rostrum emptied 10 million homes behind him. One event, read from two ends. But a foreign rostrum is a stage he was invited onto. The harder stage is the one back home. The harder question waits at home. By what right does he still speak for the country, with no election behind him? The answer is a single clause of martial law. It holds, and it satisfies no one. The vote due in 2024 never happened. He now runs 2 years past his term, with no ballot cast. Hold a vote under shelling, and the count is contested. Skip it, and the mandate is contested. Both roads lose. To vote was to stage a legitimacy the shelling could break. To wait was to let the doubt harden into fact. One choice spends legitimacy, the other spends unity. Whichever he picks, he pays in the coin he most needs to keep. Then the loop closes on its first link. The mandate, now standing on no election, was signed, first, by the same reflex we have watched from the start, the one that reads a room and knows the moment a line lands. That instrument held the studio, the parliament, the foreign chamber that returned no tally, then put him on stages he does not control. A televised White House meeting on the 28th of February 2025, its tone turning sharply confrontational, on camera in front of the American president, became one of the most replayed exchanges of the war. The reader of the page had reached the one tribune that reads back, interrupts, and settles in neither direction, where the path, built to be watched, finally arrives. So the verdict has to be read against something, and the nearest case is Churchill in 1940, a man of words who chose to stay in a bombed London rather than move the government out. But the comparison is incomplete. Churchill reached the podium late in a long official life. Zelensky reached the official life through the podium, which changes what an honest balance must weigh. His strengths are not in dispute. 2 decades of reading an audience, message discipline, the nerve to keep the nightly address running when the room went dark. But the instrument that reads a crowd does not run a treasury, and it does not settle a legitimacy no vote has resolved. A man can master the room and still not own the building it stands in. That is the day the hook first pointed to, the day there is no one left to write the words. When the confrontation in the White House turned sharp on camera and settled nothing, the page was gone, and only the man and the crowd remained. So the plain question is this: when the script runs out mid-war, what does a leader do next? and what is left of him once the war removes the one signal he was trained to read. Elsewhere on this channel, we read Churchill again. The summer of 1940 followed all the way through. This is the Tactical Historian, where paths are read like blueprints.